The Converted Man here. So, quick follow-up-ish to the near-death experience talk I had a while back, where I looked at some of the academic research and papers and such on this topic, the meta data research and things like this. And from all of that, we do not have, as far as I'm aware, I haven't seen it at any rate, a very well documented case where a person is near death or at death or however you want to put that, and then is able to later on describe what things that they could not have known had they remained inside of their own body. So this out of body type of experience that has not been well documented in a way that would convince the skeptic at any rate. So usually what happens is, during somebody's in the OR or somebody's in the emergency room or whatever, and they're dying. CPR is being performed, different medicines are being administered. The focus is on saving the person's life and not on recording, the events that are going on in that room with, say, a video camera or something like that, because, well, that causes all sorts of privacy concerns. You'd have to agree prior to going in that you're okay with your medical procedure being documented. You've seen on television or in movies the operating room theater. Well, before a person goes into that, they have to agree that, yeah, I'm fine with doing that. Because there's patient confidentiality and all this to worry about. You just don't get shoved into one of those randomly. And unlike Seinfeld, of course, had the Junior Mint where everything is open and no, that doesn't happen. It's sealed off. You can view it through glass, maybe. Usually now, I think they probably would do cameras instead. You could view it that way. That you're not viewing it. You're viewing it live, perhaps, but you're viewing it, remotely, so that there's more sanitation and less chance for contamination. But at any rate, what we have in these reports of near-death experience, of course, what the metadata studies have done is collect all the different studies together and look at all of them and try to figure out what's going on. And in that, you have reports. You have first the problem of the definition of death. What does that mean? When does that occur? Now, that's important for the scientific rigor of any given study. We have to define our terms very precisely. What do you mean near death? What does that mean? What about going under with with other medicines? Is that like death, or is that different? You're not conscious, you're not aware when you're put under. So what's going on there? Why are people not experiencing stuff then? What is it only happening during cardiac arrest, or is it happening? So there's a lot to be worked out to classify what the thing is first before going to try to study it. Then what you have is typically you have an individual self-reporting the events. And then you have interviews of nurses or doctors that were in during the time that the patient was being worked on. So you're relying on memory. You're not relying on a recording, audio, video recording of the events. You're relying on people's recollection of the event. One study that was in there had somebody that said, oh, the numbers on this machine are, they listed out the numbers, and then supposedly when they moved the machine, they found those numbers there. But they didn't bother to document any of this with photographs. No photograph of the numbers on the machine, no audio video recording of the person saying what the numbers are before they looked at the machine, no documentation like this. So you're relying purely on hearsay of the people involved. You're relying on purely memory of the events at hand, and you're not asking the critical questions. So the person that memorized this number said they have OCD, that they memorize big numbers or whatever. It's like, okay, great. So how do we know they didn't see a number like this somewhere else, and that the number is the same on all these machines? So there's all these questions that just don't get answered. Now, there was a hospital that had on the roof of the OR, where lots of people go into and get operated on to get their lives saved. They had taped on the ceiling a piece of paper, and on this side of the paper that's against the roof, against the ceiling, were words. And so they were waiting for the time that the person would come out of being, the trauma, and say, hey, I floated up out of my body, and by the way, it reads this, and say what's on the paper. But they said, well, we'll publish our results in a few years. And that was a few years back. And as far as I know, we haven't heard from them. So I suspect they have nobody has ever actually reported what's on that paper. A different hospital had like a box of objects on a shelf or something like this. And so the box was actually open so you could see in there, but you could only go and see what's up there by having a ladder. So if the person is floating outside of their body, then they could float up there and look in there and tell us what's in the box. Nobody that's a nurse or a doctor knows what's in the box. Only like the director of the hospital knows for sure what's in there. And again, nobody has done that. There's zero documentation of such phenomenon taking place. What you do have, and all you have, as far as I know, through my look at all the metadata studies that have been done about these things, is people saying after the event what happened, and then reporting, getting information from other people at the event. So we're relying completely on hearsay. We're relying completely on memory, which can be flawed. So it's like, oh, but the person said everything. They remembered everything that was said during the operation. They knew all the things that were said. Did they? Or is it just that after the fact they pieced together stuff, and then the doctor's like, oh yeah, I think that's what we said, or whatever. There's not accurate documentation going on. It's extraordinarily simple. If people are having out of body experiences, which is reported to happen during some NDEs, some near-death experiences, and that's the aspect that's like testable and demonstrably demonstratable, would be an out-of-body thing. Because if you could really leave your body, I'm not sure how that would work, or why you would be able to hear or see anything, when hearing and seeing are both things that your physical body can do. But I guess your essence, your soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it, apparently can see and hear, and also can defy gravity. Although how that works is another question that would have to be resolved. Well, why is it if it's defying gravity and the planet's going, moving real fast? If you defy gravity, the planet's gone. You're no longer where you were anymore. Okay, the planet's spinning beneath you really, really fast. So if you're ignoring gravity, then it's spinning below you really fast. And so if you had an out of body and you defied gravity, the planet would soon spin. You would see all the ground go, it's like however fast it rotates, and so you wouldn't even see the OR. And then if it's not defying gravity, but yet you're floating, how are you floating? What's the mechanism? How are you seeing or hearing or remembering any of this? All these unanswered questions that just to go, well, it's a spirit, it's a soul, it's your essence, it's your higher self. No, there's no proof of any of that. So if the person is actually somehow seeing what's going on outside of them, then a very simple controlled test can be made to see if this is really happening. It's that simple. You put a little object, and only maybe like one person knows what that is. You put it up high, where nobody can see it. You don't even have to put it in a full box. I mean, you can put it behind a piece of paper or something. But the point is that the patient and the doctors and the nurses, they don't know what that is. Maybe they don't even know that it is up there. And they know that there's a shelf up there, maybe, but they, don't give it a second or even a first thought because it's just been there since they started working. So whatever. It's not important to their job, so they ignore it. People tend to, you don't pay attention to things unless you need to, right? So, okay. And then the person, they almost die, they get revived, and they say, I saw this thing right up there. And let's, and then before anything else happens, there's a protocol. We're going, okay, quick, sign this paper that says you're okay with being recorded audio, video. Okay, and then bring in the camera, start recording. What did you see up there? Name the thing, describe it as best you can. The person does that. Okay, let's go and get the ladder and go and see what the hell is up there. Very simple. Hasn't been done. Period. End of story. There is, as far as I know, if you think you have one, then put it forth. Nothing like that has been done. What you have and all you have, again, to my knowledge, is people reporting that they saw or heard X, Y, and Z after the fact. Who knows how long after the fact, after the event, and so on. So, there's one commenter on my videos. I don't know if he is pro or questioning NDEs or out of bodies or whatever. I sometimes it's unclear to me if people do or don't believe these things, or if they think that they have happened. What you have is a phenomenon that people experience or reported to experience where they were close to death, they were at death, however you want to put it, and then they say, oh, yeah, I saw the light and it was really pleasant, or I saw the fire and it was really unpleasant, or whatever it is. And because it's interesting, because it's unusual, then it gets reported. So normally what happens when somebody almost dies is they get rescued, and that's it. That's the end of the story. They don't say that they saw anything. That's the majority of cases. All the times when this happens, normally people don't see diddly squat or hear diddly squat. They don't report because there's nothing to report. It's like I was here one moment, and then I woke up and I was in the hospital bed. That's it. That's all I know. I was climbing my ladder to my roof, and I know I fell down, and then the next thing I know, here I am in the hospital. So that's all I know. Between that event, I don't know. I wasn't there. Nothing happened, as far as I know, because they are unconscious. They don't, in that moment. There's nothing going on in the brain. So that's the normal. That's what happens the majority of time. Is there is no story to tell. So when somebody says, oh yeah, I saw the other world, I saw heaven or hell or whatever, Well, now we have a story that, wow, that's weird. Let's write that down. Let's report it. Let's tell people about it because it's unusual. It's now a story. Whereas before, you didn't have a story. The person died almost, and then they were saved, and they're not dead. Cool, good job, science. We've done it. Great. Cool. That's it. That's the story. It's not much. It's not enough to print in the newspaper or make books out of or whatever, because who cares? Yeah, and that happens all the time. What's the big deal, But somebody said, oh yeah, like there was a case of a little kid that claimed to go to heaven. Well, and there was a whole movie made out of it. And then later on, the family came out and the kid came out and said, no, I made it all up. I was told to say it by my parents, and the parents were like, yeah, no, we made it all up. Now they got their money, so who cares, But yeah, they admitted it was all made up. And that's the point. You can make up a story. It doesn't even have to be real. So how do we know that they're reporting something that they actually experienced? We don't. We have to take their word for it. And that's another problem with these NDEs. So if there is some, what we have is something that the brain can do for whatever reason. It produces audio-visual things, dreams, hallucinations during near stressful times. And some people report that, and then they write down, and then they want to figure out what's going on. And the woo people, the pseudoscience people, get a hold of it, and then they run with it. The real science gets a hold of it and says, well, that's interesting. Let's try to figure out let's first narrow down what we're talking about here. Then let's try to figure out what's going on psychologically or medically speaking, and get to the bottom of what's really going on, and not just assume that we've now discovered that there really is an afterlife. Because having an NDE doesn't prove that there's an afterlife. It just means that your brain did something, and did it do it during the time you were dead, or did it do it after the event? Like dreams. Like you remember dreams when you wake up, right? And it's like, but how does that work? And so there's questions certainly that we have that aren't resolved yet. That doesn't mean anything. People do this. I see this far too often in my comment sections on different videos. Like, well, we don't understand this. Did we evolve? Somebody was asking if we evolved from fish. I was like, I don't know. I think we're related to them. What's this got to do with anything? It's like, well, no, we're not. And so that proves something. Like, I don't know. What does that prove? Like that God exists? Like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, we don't know the answer. Like, why is our brain different than the other animals? We're special. I'm like, well, we're different. I get, what are you getting at? Like, oh, we don't know, therefore God. That's what a lot of it boils down to that. And I'm like, look, I know there's a lot of mystery, but that's just it. There's a mystery. And so let's not try to resolve that mystery by appealing to some other mystery, or by appealing to something we have not yet demonstrated to even be a thing yet. So the classic example I've given is my door opens. I don't see any person or animal responsible for my door opening. I investigate it, and I can't figure out why it opened. So I conclude, oh, it must have been a ghost, or it must have been aliens, or maybe there was a time traveler, or the Invisible Man did it. Well, that's the wrong conclusion, because I don't have an example of any of those things. So I just have a mystery. Well, my door opened and I don't know why, and that's that. So when it comes to so-called near-death experiences, then you have the added phenomenon of out-of-body experiences. The out-of-body experience, as far as I know, hasn't been demonstrated ever Period. End of story. There's no actual good, solid, real documentation. There is the person said it after the event, and that's it. So we have a story. We have, people making up a story as far as we know. Pardon me. Of course, my otherwise worthy adversary, frenemy, whatever I want to call him, I don't know, the Trinity solution. I do want to talk a little bit about what he said on my NDE video, because the lack of skepticism is, I think, worth addressing. So he said, here's this event that I was told about, that there was, this girl that he knew, a girlfriend he'd had, and that she saw herself, she was kicked in the head by a horse, when she was at the hospital. She saw herself lying on the table and was able to describe things that were happening outside of the ER. And then they had an uncle who was an atheist who died on the operating table and reported that he went to hell. Okay, well, that's after the event. So both of these people said that they had some sort of experience after the event. How long after the event did they report this to you? And besides their own reporting of it, what evidence do you have that it happened? None. Well, but they wouldn't lie to me. I didn't say that they lied to you. They could be wrong. They could think that something had happened, or they could remember that something happened. Memory can be flawed. I'll prove that. It's very simple to prove. What did you have last week to eat for dinner? Do you remember? Probably not unless it was something really extraordinary or special. Okay, you just, how many times in the last week have you gone to the bathroom? Unless you're recording it, you don't know. Why? Because you just kind of blank it out. It's not important enough to remember. You only remember the significant events. The thing that's what you remember. You don't remember, like when you travel. Here's another good example. When you're driving somewhere for the first time, it seems to take forever to get there. But on the way home, it's like no time at all. Well, why is that? Because your brain records the new event and it processes it differently. Then once it knows that, then it kind of like processes it a different way, which is why when you're younger, the time that your childhood seems to have taken way long time in your memory than your adult life. Your adult life seems like, whoo, flash, like, wow, because your brain has become used to so many events that things can kind of just, when looking at it with your memory, kind of just flash by. So, look, memory is not a reliable thing. It doesn't matter how, but the person never lies, doesn't matter. The thing is that memory is not reliable. So, it doesn't matter what they said happened to them. What matters is, what can we demonstrate about this? And we can't. There is nothing to demonstrate because it happened in the past. We weren't there. We don't have any documentation. We don't have any records. Did you talk to the nurses or the doctors in the ER or people outside of the ER? Did you interview them? No. Why not? So both of these events, I said, okay, look, yeah, I believe you that you're reporting this honestly. I'm not saying that you're dishonest. I'm not saying that the people saying these things are dishonest. I'm saying that we have to be skeptical of these sort of things because memory is flawed, because people that didn't happen, and we're really good. People are really good at making stories and believing the stories that we made ourselves. And we don't have to do that deliberately for that to happen. It just is something that happens. And the personal incredulity of people is to say, no, that's not, no, that can't be, like with the Mandela effect, okay? Where people say, oh, it's Berenstein Bears. No, it's Bernstein Bears. It's Baron, and then the obvious answer is, well, it's an alternate universe. What? No, it's people not remembering some small mundane detail. It's like, oh, it's Fruit Loops. It's Fruit Loops, and it's like, no, it's just you're remembering it wrong, and other people happen to remember things wrong too, and that's just a thing that happens. And then the people invent an explanation because they don't want to just admit that their memory can be flawed. They're like, oh, but how could everybody remember it differently? Well, because that's what brains do. They remember one pattern rather than the other pattern. That's the easy explanation, but it's not fun. It's more fun to believe that these things are because there's a parallel universe. That's a more interesting story. So we believe it. Or, well, I don't, but people believe it. So, yes, from the person that believes that NDEs are a thing because they think that they prove the supernatural, then none of this matters. They've convinced themselves that this. Here's another example that proves that there's a supernatural realm. No, all it does is prove that people have weird experiences in their brain, and we don't seem to know that much about it. And the documentation of it is really very poor. It's not very well documented. During the event itself, why we would have at least one recorded audio video of the operation taking place, and then following that operation, an interview with that person, and an interview with the doctors and nurses, and the person saying what they heard and saw, and we can see what they heard and saw. And there's no edits. There's no funny shenanigans going on. You would think that there'd be at least one thing like that, but there isn't. So why not? Well, either because nobody has bothered to try to actually document it, or this event just is something that sometimes happens and people report it and it becomes a story and we make more of it than we should. We need to be skeptical thinkers, my friends, my viewers, my commenters, whether you're a theist or not a theist or whatever you might be in the soul or the spirit or God or the afterlife or whatever. We have to be skeptical about these sort of things, because the brain, people say, oh, the brain, we don't know a lot about the brain. Well, yeah. And then you're going to then use that as a jumping off point to say, well, therefore there must be a soul. No, if we don't know a lot about the brain, then how could we ever rule out that it's not some natural explanation that we just haven't figured out yet? Looking for proof of the soul or the spirit means that essentially you're saying that the soul or the spirit is going to be a physical phenomenon. Because otherwise you couldn't have scientific evidence of it. So either there's going to be some demonstrable way to demonstrate that people can go outside of their bodies, and therefore there's some phenomenon that we could somehow explain naturally, which means that it's not supernatural. So those that insist that there isn't any scientific way to prove the supernatural, well, then there you go. So why are you wasting everybody's time trying to show us proof of something that you say that there can't be proof of? It's like, which is it? Pick one. Anyways. All right. So that's NDEs recovered. And hopefully this answers all the complaints and the what about ifs that I've gotten so far. Probably not. I'll probably get more. But what about this comments? Just give me the scientific study that demonstrably demonstrates the things that I've been talking about, and that will convince me. You don't have it though. It's not out there. I've already looked, and I guarantee you, if you look, you'll find books, lots of books. People can write books. That's the thing, is that's different from a peer-reviewed paper. A book is very different. It's a whole different field there. So, yeah, it's easy to write. Well, not easy, but it's simple to write a book and get it published. It's difficult to write a paper and have it peer-reviewed and survive that process. So, why haven't the NDEs survived that sort of process yet? Maybe that should give us pause. All right. Thanks for listening, and stay skeptical. Or if you're not skeptical, become skeptical, because that's a good thing to be, I think.